Welcome to everyone. I know that this is a very challenging time, and if you ask a business owner how they're doing, the answer you're probably going to get is really busy. And I think employees are feeling very similar. And I just think this, hats off to the Region of Waterloo for seeing that this is something in the chambers, for seeing that this is something that our community needs, and for helping everyone get the right tools and strategies. We've got an amazing panel planned here today. I don't know if I know everyone here, but my name is Melissa Durrell. I am the founder and run a company called Durrell Communications. But I think the reason why I'm in this role today is because of the work I used to do as a journalist and a reporter at CTV. So I'll do my best reporting skills here and managing this amazing panel that'll be joining us and giving us information today. So before we begin, though, we have to hand the mic over to Councillor Helen Gillette, who's the chair of our Economic Development Committee at the region. A big job. Helen, would you like to take the mic?
Thanks so much, Melissa. It's an honor. It's an honor to be with this group. I was just looking at the intelligence around the panel, and I'm so excited at what we're going to be able to do today. So I just want to get some housekeeping done and some quick intro notes, and we'll get moving. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. So I just want to start off by saying, yes, of course, welcome. I'm so pleased to represent our regional government by way of providing an extended welcome to all of you and in this Zoom and beyond who will benefit from a very important initiative, one of many important initiatives that were brought collaboratively by Smart Waterloo Region, Economic Development staff, which is a growing entity. I'm kind of proud of economic development because they started out with not a huge workforce, but because of our really nimble and an intelligent look at solutions, we've created pilot projects that have gone countrywide, province-wide, and been able to engage more staff to be able to keep rolling out responses that are practical and immediate to some of the needs of COVID. And this is certainly a very important one. I think we've all gone out there and witnessed young folks who are at the front lines of restaurants or park admissions or many other things where they haven't been treated very, very graciously, I'll say. You know, we human beings get a little anxious sometimes, and COVID has done, I don't think there's any of us that haven't felt the anxiety of COVID. So I'm really proud and pleased to congratulate Matthew Chandy. Laura's here and Rachel's here, and there's a few. I hate when I start throwing names up and forget anybody, but we have got a great team, and like I said, who are very, very responsive. So I just wanted to start it out from that perspective. We want to continue to promote post-COVID recovery. So if anyone's got any ideas on some things we can do to continue to do that, because let's face it, business has never needed government like this before. And the way that we're doing these things. So I think Smart Water Region's done a great job of harnessing concerns and trying to respond accordingly. So that being said, I'd like to pass it over to, I missed some of these faces. I can tell you, I'm beaming to be able to see you guys, but I'd like to certainly pass it over to Melissa, who is a journalist, a reporter, a politician, an entrepreneur, a strategist. Man, she's getting out there doing some great stuff. So I think she's the perfect MC for us today. I'm really excited about what we're going to get done today. So over to you, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Now, I think many of you have already watched a webinar, and for those of you who haven't got to see it, I believe it'll be available, and we highly recommend you do. But we're just going to go over some of those high-level points for those of you that did get to see it. And so let's talk about those guiding principles when it comes to de-escalation. And one of the things we want to think about is always think about what's going on in the other person's life, right? So we can't, it's sort of that old adage my grandmother used to say, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I think that that's so important as we move forward in these new times, right? I want to be careful. It's not the new normal, it's new times. And then the other part, of course, is the more interpersonal relationship you have with the individual, the higher likelihood of escalation. So that's one of the things, relationships, and we're going to hear that over and over, I think, over the next hour. And avoid making the individual feel hopeless, helpless, or humiliated. And that's really important as well. So step one of the escalation process, and this is just a great little chart to sort of put everything into perspective for people, but of course is awareness, being aware of individuals' breathing, of standing position, how loud they're speaking, and being aware of your breathing and your tone is really important. Step 2, containment. So use effective listening skills and show empathy. And we're going to talk about some of those skills today as well. Step 3, problem solving. So prioritize issues and identify what the customer is interested in. I know Tracy has some ideas that some of the Uptown businesses have shared with her, and I think there's some interesting ideas that hopefully will help you and your employees in your business. Step 4, closing. So debrief the situation and learn for next time. I went to this one business conference, and it was a bunch of Air Force people. They were talking about business solutions, and they said one of the things you always have to do is debrief after everything. You know, when they're flying around in the sky, you know, think Top Gun, they come back to the ground, everybody walks into a room and they don't have any, there's no corporals, there's no captains, everybody's the same, and they debrief. I think it's really important, debrief, whether you're the owner, an employee, everyone needs to debrief on the same page and make sure that you're actually learning from that situation. And then at any time, disengage. We've got bylaw here to talk about it. So I've sort of hinted at some of the amazing people that are on this panel, but I'll get you to wave when I say your name, although all of our names are the new Zoom world. Your names are actually there, but let's start with Tracy Van Kelse, who is the representing Uptown Waterloo BIA. I know she's taken this really seriously and talked to a lot of the businesses, so she's got notes and notes that I can't wait for her to share with everyone. Betty Priest, give us a little wave there. University of Waterloo, our academic on the panel. She's also part of Credence & Co. She is a conflict resolution expert. So think of those questions you want to ask. I know Betty's excited to answer them. Shelley Schazenbacher. There we go. There's Shelley. Great. Now she's with Community Justice Initiative, which is an amazing group in our community right now. I remember as a city councillor, I called on them on many occasions to talk about neighborhood conflict resolution. She's here to tell us, and they're really grassroots, ground level. So great conflict resolution expert to share her thoughts and her ideas with us today. And then Thomas Hudison. Thomas, give us a wave. There he is. Awesome. And I can see green behind you, so I'm pretty sure that is not your real background. This is the summer background, Tom. Tom is, of course, a bylaw officer. And so we can talk a little bit about, well, he's not a lawyer, he can definitely speak to some of the laws, bylaws that our community is following. So thank you, everyone. I don't know if you want to give them applause. I'll give one for all the attendees. Thanks for joining us today. It's amazing to have you all here. So let's jump right in, because I do think everybody's got a lot of questions. And one of the ones that I think is just on everybody's mind is, and I think anecdotally we all feel this way. We've been reading the newspaper, watching the news, and hearing it on the radio. But give us some context here. Have you been seeing an increase in customer conflict in Waterloo region? And what have you or others in the community been seeing? And I'm going to start with Tracy on the ground level, who's representing a lot of the businesses here in our community. Tracy, what are you seeing? Is there actually an increase?
Yeah, so in speaking to small and medium-sized businesses in Uptown Waterloo, overall, most of them have seen an increase in customer conflict during the pandemic. It has been tapering off a little bit since the vaccine passports have been in, but definitely seen an increase. It's really interesting too, Melissa, in speaking to one particular business owner, she talked about that they see extremes. So she talked about the customer who wants every rule, procedure, and protocol followed perfectly without consideration of anything else. And they also see a customer who's the one that refuses to wear the mask, refuses to follow their guidelines, and doesn't want to provide their vaccine passport. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Thomas, you're kind of the one that people get called in. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing.
Right. So we sort of work the other side of that. We'll receive the complaints about businesses and deal with the businesses about the complaint that we receive. As far as the pandemic is concerned, people have been complaining since the beginning, and we know that businesses have been having a lot of problems with the regulations as well. They're often not clear. It's hard to get clarity, and so we're trying to work with everyone as far as what these things mean and how they're applied. So it's been very steady for us. I think when the regulations change, it peaks for us. We get a lot of questions from both businesses and the public, but it has been consistent in that regard.
Just got my coffee delivered, so that's wonderful.
Nice.
So we're all going to be in a great mood after this because I'm going to be caffeinated up. Now, tell me a little bit, because one of the things I was curious about, and I kind of mentioned it off the top, was are you actually seeing, Tom, more people complaining, or is it, if we went back 2 years, is it the same kind of idea? Like, are we actually seeing peaks?
Yeah, when it changes, we see peaks, and the nature of the questions change with how the regulations change. So, a year and a half ago, we had a lot of questions about masks. And so that kind of issue would have, it really did peak when I look at our graph. Now it's just every now and then we're receiving complaints, and there's a much better understanding, I think, in the public and with businesses is what's expected, and that the vaccine passport, or the certification, whatever you want to call it, has gone more smoothly than we anticipated. We thought that there would be a lot more issues with it than we have had, and I was surprised to hear that from Tracy yesterday as well, that was sort of similar, that it isn't a huge or as big of a concern as everyone had anticipated, but I don't know whether it's causing businesses more grief with those points of trouble that they do have, whether it's more escalated now because of that, it's a little more personal or whatever. So
I know in Uptown Waterloo, there were quite a few rallies, if you will. Tracy, can you share with us a little bit about what happened to some of the businesses after those rallies?
Yeah, for sure. There were some of the anti-vaccination, anti-mask rallies that happened at the square. And after the rallies were done, individuals from the rallies were going into businesses and not following the protocol that the business had in place around wearing masks or physical distancing and that type of thing. And a lot of our small, medium-sized businesses employ young people, and they're not always as well schooled in dealing with conflict resolution as some of us more mature folks. And so, that is a real challenge for individuals. I have to say, though, in speaking to a lot of businesses, most people out there inherently, they're listening, they're following protocols. It's just there's this minority of folks that are really trying to push that envelope. And so a lot of our businesses have resorted to making sure that they're educating, very similar to what Tom's approach would be with the public or with bylaw, in that they're just explaining what the rules are. And I even had one of the businesses say if she tells her employees to blame up. So if they're complaining about what the protocols are, I'm really sorry, it's not me, it's my boss, and you can take it to the management, that type of thing. So I think that it really does help for the younger generation to be able to have that ability to be able to do that. So I think that was a good protocol that business put in place. And one last thing, Melissa, maybe I'd add from another business owner who said that he felt that things have shifted from pre-COVID, where people were generally complaining about stuff that the operator did wrong, and that prices were too high or service, and that's really changed a lot. He says it's been a lot less lately, and he thinks it's due to, and I thought this was really interesting, and I feel like this is happening, but he thinks it's about the community wanting to support the small businesses in the world, the restaurant world, where they've been really impacted by the pandemic. So I thought that was an interesting comment.
And that makes me really happy and feel good for our community, if that's part of it. I think this is a really nice transition to move to some of our other experts as we hear some of these business owners are coming up with their own tips and techniques. But I'm curious, and Betty, I'll begin with you. Do you have any tips or techniques that have worked well that you could suggest that have been successful for what business owners can do during these trying times?
Sure. There's a couple of things I would offer, and one of them is never underestimate the power of preparation. We know that we're walking into a tricky environment because of new news or new expectations and so forth that have come in. Preparing ourselves to be grounded before the event happens means that we're not being taken off guard. And so, that's a small thing maybe, but to always assume that an escalated customer might walk in, and how do we do that self-talk, that self-preparation in advance? So that's one thing I would offer. Another one that I would offer is, I think of this as $1 million question, and it was sort of in the slideshow that was sent out before this talk, and that is question that I ask people to think about is, what could be going on for this person that has nothing to do with me? One of the things that escalates conflict, when a person comes in escalated and we take it personally, we feel like it's our problem, it's our job to solve this person's problem. It's our fault that this, like, somehow we feel personally attacked. We feel like we're at risk. And I'm not talking about literal risk, but just sort of that emotional risk that we're feeling. If we think the other person's intention is about us, we're more likely to get defensive. And when we're defensive and they're defensive, it's more likely to escalate. So I tell people to remember this mantra. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me, except the parts that are. Like, if I just hit you and you respond back, that's about me. But realistically, when someone comes in and they're escalated, it's not about the customer service representative at the front door or wherever they're standing. It's really about the stuff that they're bringing into this context. And maybe just a quick story around that. I remember a number of Christmases ago, before COVID, being in a bookstore, and there was an altercation happening between the manager and a woman who was trying to purchase something. It was really loud, and all the tills around this were keeping on going. And the woman in front of me was called up to go to the till next to where this altercation was happening. And she went towards the till that she was supposed to go to. And then she did a detour and went to this woman and this man who were having this very loud altercation. And she said something to the woman like, "You must be having a bad day." And the woman fell into her arms weeping. Yeah. And I wondered, how would the exchange between the man and the woman, the man was the manager of the bookstore, how would that exchange between the two of them have been different if he had begun with the assumption that this woman and each of them have a mountain they're climbing, and the mountain has nothing to do with each other? The bookstore and the sale of the books is just context in which this escalation is happening. And so this question, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me. What could be going on for this person that has nothing to do with me? I think that kind of a question helps us to stay grounded. Another item that I would maybe just offer, and I was reading this, I was reading an article in the newspaper just yesterday about this, so that when we're especially busy or stressed, we make poor decisions. And when the customer, well, we as a customer service representative, you might be busy and stressed, but the customer is also experiencing their own hopelessness, their own helplessness, their own stress, and they're not necessarily making their wisest decision. So it's not about me. Then the other thing that I would offer is this. Number of years ago, because I sometimes teach in the US, I have to spend time at the border and get my papers signed. And the border guard says to me, and it was like a test, he says, "The guys in here, the people, they're really grumpy. How do I deal with them fast?" And I was like, well, I had to answer. So I came up with this statement, and I've offered it often since, that when you're trying to de-escalate an escalated colleague or a customer or somebody crossing the border, look for what I call the Yesable Statement. That's a word I made up, Yesable, or what can you say yes to in the other person's statement? If there's something you can say yes to, it's more likely that the person will, it takes people, they expect a no. People expect a no, they expect resistance, right? And when we say yes, we kind of open the gates to a different kind of an energy to happen between us. And once we have that Yesable, and it could be, there's something that they've said that we are agreeing to, or it could even be, this is really hard, right? Like you don't need to say yes to their logic. You can even just say yes to the fact that it's a hard moment. Just finding something to say yes to changes that dynamic. It's short, and the person starts to catch that you're not opposed to them, you're kind of with them. And in that withness, the de-escalation happens a little more. And from there we can do, I like to do this next thing, is to do a check-in. It sounds like a paraphrase, but it's really shows that we're listening, because we're saying, I want to make sure I've heard you correctly. Is this, and this, is that what's important to you? And that kind of a check-in shows that we are so attentive. We want to make sure we've heard them correctly. Once we get that, then we can open up the conversation. If they're ready to go there, not everybody is. We always have those situations where we do need to exit, or we need to ask them to leave. But there are a lot of situations where we can offer the Yesable, then the check-in, have we heard it correctly? And then maybe an open-ended question to understand a little bit more where they're coming from.
Betty, I took so many notes. I love that. It's really great information. Shelley, would you like to jump in and share some additional thoughts?
Sure. I agree with everything that he said, for sure. You know, it's funny. I think that when we think about COVID and we think about the last couple of years, you know, we've all had our own experience and impact from that. And I think that what happens is now, as we're starting to sort of come out of it, there's residue that's left from it. There's experiences, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's all of those pieces. And so when I think about, you know, a customer, let's say a hostess at a restaurant, customers coming in, they're not happy, they're already starting to escalate. We have to think about the impacts that the experiences of that hostess have been over time, because that imprints them in a way that, you know, it's just one more person I have to deal with. So I think when Betty talks about, you know, sort of this idea that you need to practice, you need to debrief, you need to be aware of this experience. How do you debrief it? How do you talk about what could you do the next time when it's sort of fresh and you've had some time to sort of de-escalate yourself and be prepared for what happens next time. The other thing I would offer is this idea that for people, when they're escalating, that perception is their reality. They are experiencing this is true. And so, you know, meeting people where they are, listening to them, finding that place of empathy. So one of the ways I look at empathy is I might not be able to completely understand and be in your shoes of your experience. However, if you're feeling anxiety or you're angry, can I remember a time where I felt those things? And then I can relate to you because I've had those same similar experiences. I think language is really important. So I'm going to give you one small thing, and that is on store windows, we have things like no mask, no service. Is there a different way that we can articulate that is more invitational, that is maybe here's the clarity of how we process, this is how we invite you into our business, these are sort of the things we expect, and here's what you can expect in your interactions with us as a business. So, you know, maybe one small thing would be you come in and it's put your mask on versus we have masks here, would you like one? It's very different. It is inviting people in a way that perhaps doesn't escalate it. And so I think kindness is really important. And it's also being aware of what's happening to us inside of ourselves when we're meeting that customer. And so I think it takes pausing, it takes breathing, all of those pieces. And those things take practice because we have to be self-aware in how we're showing up and how people are experiencing us as somebody representing a business.
Can I just
Thank you so much, Shelley? Yeah, go ahead, Betty.
Just as a way of a metaphor, and I love metaphors, it's easier to chop wood with the grain than against the grain, or it's easier to go with the flow of the river than against the flow of the river. You know, stopping a river, you know what that's like. That's not, the levee will break. And if you're trying to be the levee or chop against the grain, it's going to escalate and be tough. But I think what you're saying, Shelley, is go with the grain, and, you know, to say something like, oh, here's the mask, right? Like, you know, in a way you're going with the grain, inviting the person along, as opposed to saying, no. Yeah.
No mask, no service, instead of, can we offer you a mask? And you're more than welcome to come into our space. Tracy, I know some of the businesses gave you some of their tips and techniques. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I was thinking as Betty was talking about the yesables, we had one business owner who came back and said, we try to avoid saying no, so I'll give him the word yesable, looking for the yesables, you know, rather than somebody coming up to them and saying, hey, can I eat inside without my vaccination pass? And it's like, hi, sir, we'd love to see you out on our patio and help you get some takeout food, you know, type thing. So they're not really saying no. So I think that's being heard loud and clear with businesses, and around language, like what Shelley was talking about. A couple of the ideas that they shared that they tend to use in their practices is one business owner said, always act like you're on camera. So that's probably good to remind yourself, right? I already said earlier around the educating the customer around what their protocols are, so they have a basic understanding. Both Betty and Shelley talked about the importance of listening, because sometimes people really want to be heard. So a lot of our businesses are doing that, and kindness too, which both of you had mentioned as well, and empathy are certainly two things that our business owners and their employees are trying to allude to when they're dealing with folks that are having a more challenging time. One other thing I think I might mention is that if I've had a business owner say, if you're able to staff a little bit heavier, then you have more people that are around. So if there is something that happens, then it may de-escalate quicker because there's more staff around to be able to help deal with the situation. So, but we all know, and we were kind of talking about this ahead of time of the call, just with folks and being underserviced right now with a lot of our small businesses. They just can't find the talent right now, and so they're feeling overworked and rushed. Betty and Shelley both touched on that too, and that happens from the server point of view or the small business employee point of view, where they may be rushing, and then somebody feels like they're getting brushed off and might get frustrated. So I know our businesses are working really hard to help coach their employees through all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Leadership is so important in times like this. Betty, you shared a lollipop story, so I'm just going to cue you up for that because I thought it was great.
Sure. This is not my story, but it's a clever story, and it's a police department, I believe, in Western Canada. They had struggles with, I believe it was Canada Day celebrations, and for year after year, the attendees were quite escalated, and they would after the event, and they wouldn't disperse. And the police were struggling because it was creating a bit of kind of an us-them environment. And so they started handing out lollipops. And when somebody had a lollipop in their mouth, they just couldn't be swearing very long because they were sucking on the lollipop, and plus the sugar high, I think, started to get, everybody loves a lollipop, makes you feel like you're 5 again. And there was something about handing out the lollipops that changed the dynamic, but it also makes the police officer a partner with the person as opposed to a resistance person with the person, right? Like it changes the dynamic of the relationship. The lollipop does change the mouth. It changes what you say and what you think, but it also changes the nature of the interaction. It's like they come with, hey, here's a lollipop. How are you doing? As opposed to, hey, get out of here, right? And it does echo what Shelley said earlier. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Betty. Now, not everyone lollipops are going to work, and so Tom, we're going to come with the tough question here is, when should you call for support instead of using de-escalation techniques?
Yeah, and I think it was really important to preface it with all this material beforehand as well, because the key to these situations is staff having confidence in what they're doing. And to have confidence, they need to have knowledge. They have to understand the regulation that they're responsible for at that door, and to know what it is that they have to do, and that's why they have to do it. And I think that's an important piece of knowledge, and also for employers to have policies in place about how these things will be handled and procedures that can be followed when they happen, and having supports in place. And so when you have all of those things lined up and you have an employee who's ready to face that challenge, when they're employing these techniques, it is escalating, a person is pushing past them, your procedures are going to say, look, at this point, you kind of have to maintain the safety of the situation. You don't want to endanger yourself, the patrons, the customer who's causing the problem. And, as we all saw in that widely viewed video clip from a couple of weeks ago at the restaurant, it's a pretty good idea of what not to do, because of when you start engaging at that level, your staff are not prepared to do that. They're not professionals. They have no training or resources to fall back on to do that kind of thing. And you have to be able to recognize at what point you're going to call the police and how you're going to contain the situation in the interim. Letting a person sit there until the police come, fine. No one's being hurt. The situation isn't getting out of control. You could give them a cup of water while they wait or whatever. But to know that your staff are equipped with the knowledge of, when we've done all of this and a situation becomes more than that, you call the manager, and the manager comes over, and the manager can call the police, but that'll all be in your procedures, and having those supports in place and available is key. I think, you know, having it like, well, call me and I'll get back to you may not cut it when someone's yelling at the front desk. So you really want to think situations through, and it's all planning. You really want to know why you're doing what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and at what point you're going to escalate it. And so, you know, these are discussions to have with your employees, and it's going to be dependent on your business. You know, bars can have security people, you'll have different, you know, routines that you're going to follow. And so again, it's a lot of planning and thinking it through and making sure that your employees are aware and follow the processes that you put in place.
It's interesting because then communications will often run crisis sort of boot camp. So what's the worst thing that can happen? And then you make sure everyone's on the same page, and hopefully that never happens, but we do, you know, run these sorts of boot camps. And it sounds like, you know, those kind of scenarios come in really handy with businesses. Betty, I'm wondering, do you have anything else to add when this situation has escalated and techniques and the tips that you've shared are no longer working? Shelley, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so maybe just a couple of ways of thinking about it. Like, I think about this kind of hand stance. If we are only setting boundaries with the individual, we're like this, and we're likely to escalate. If we're only doing this, then we're making ourselves too vulnerable to being attacked. And right from the beginning, when the person walks in, even if someone's not escalated, we really are doing this. If you're running a restaurant or, you know, another kind of a shop, you are doing this with because all of us, you're serving us, but you're also setting boundaries with us all the time when we're in the public entering your space. And when we ask questions like offering the Yesable Statement, you're doing this. When you say, I want to make sure I've understood you correctly, in a way, you're holding charge of the conversation, you're doing this. When you ask an open-ended question, so what is it that you'd like? That's this. I'm going to offer you a mask. That's this, right? And we really are doing this dance between these two. At some point, however, when the person's escalating continues, we do have the permission, I think, to make an assertive statement. And the assertive statement could be, like Tom has suggested, you know, let me see, I'm going to talk to my manager, or the manager says, I'm going to have to call the authorities. You know, that's really clearly doing this, but we can say that in more than one way. We can say it like this, which is likely to escalate before the officer shows up, or we can say it in a way that's generous and kind, even while we're doing this, which is more likely to keep the thing de-escalated at least somewhat. The other thought that I was thinking about with respect to holding boundaries is thinking about, I lost my train of thought there, my apologies. But I guess the idea that I'm driving at, oh yeah, here it is, just came back to me. This assertive statement. See, the more escalated the person becomes, we still want to honor their personhood, even though we hold this hand a little bit more strongly. And one of the assertiveness statements that I learned early in my career is this, something to the effect of like this: you can be guaranteed that I will treat you with the utmost of respect, and I expect the same from you. Now, you can't start with that statement. If you start with that statement the minute they walk in, that feels like this.
Yeah.
But if you've been doing a fair bit of this, and over time, this is not working, and your efforts at boundaries are not working either, you do have the permission to say, you can be guaranteed that throughout this interaction, I will be treating you with the utmost of respect, and I expect the same from you. When that doesn't work, then absolutely, I think we do have the permission to call someone who's further up in the chain within the system, or to call in an external authority. Absolutely.
Thanks, Betty. Shelley and Tracy, I'm going to come to you, and I just want to be cognizant of time because we do want to go to Thomas for one last question. And then anyone has questions, please put them into the chat here, and we'll start to go through those as well, because those are really important questions that you have to ask of this panel. So if you have a question, throw it into the chat now. I'll come back to those in a minute. But Shelley and Tracy, anything else you want to add about, pretty much when do you call for support?
Right. One of the things that I just want to offer is that de-escalation techniques and tools and all of those things are not things that you do to somebody. It is a process that you use to interrupt what is happening, to kind of bring people into a space of being aware of each other, right? And so one of the things that I offer that we don't very often talk about is if I'm a person who is dealing with an irate customer, I have to be aware on some level biologically what's going on in my brain. Because part of what's happening when I'm being triggered and I'm being escalated and cortisol is flooding my body, my ability to problem solve and really think about what's happening is on lockdown. I'm not able to do that. And one of the ways I can stop the flooding of cortisol in my body is breathing. That sounds really simple, and it is really hard when you're starting to feel that. And so breath is super, super important and helps to bring and re-engage your problem solving ability so that then you can do all those things that Betty is offering in a way to interact and be present to the customer that's in front of you and honor their humanity and also honor yourself in what you're asking them to do. So that's all I would offer.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Tracy?
I have used that breathing technique many times in my personal life. Breathe in and then let it out longer than you breathe in. Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add, I think, to that piece. Generally, kind of rule of thumb for businesses, our businesses anyway, is if you feel threatened, that's when you make the call to police or bylaw. At a point where young people are being, like I said, threatened or anything like that. That's what they're being coached to do by their employers. I think that all of our businesses are using some of these de-escalation techniques that we've been talking about today, and so yeah, I know it's the last resort for a lot of our businesses to have to call in for police or for bylaws. So they're looking for ways to de-escalate the situation.
And so this actually is great because, Tom, the next question I'm curious, and I know you're not a lawyer, but as a bylaw officer, what are the business owner's rights and responsibilities when dealing with an upset customer? I'm just going to add on here too and ask, what can you do and what can't you do in response to an upset customer? And is there any specific COVID-19 regulations to support businesses with customer tensions? So 3-parter, over to you, Tom.
Sure, thanks. I think the most crucial point here is between what you can and cannot do is something that you're going to need to have a discussion with competent legal counsel about. A lot of the issues that you're going to encounter are a dispute between the customer and the service provider. That's not something that bylaw is in a place to resolve. To give a quick example, masking issues, when a store has a policy for masks and they're not letting someone in and that person is upset about it, it's not something that we can enforce. This is a dispute between customer and the business. So the customer has to pursue other avenues, whether they want to go to the Human Rights Tribunal. It's not a police matter, it's not a bylaw matter anymore, because we don't enforce exemptions, because businesses, I can say this because I've researched it, do have rights to who enters their premises and under what conditions. They do have certain rights, and that's something that you have to discuss with your legal counsel regarding your own business and what services you provide in lieu of letting someone in. But when it comes to the vaccine passport and someone escalating, when you're looking for assistance, it's because it's public safety that's now at risk, and you do want the police to respond. Bylaw can come in. We don't resolve disputes. We look to see if there's been a breach of the regulations. So in the masking issue, we would tell both parties that there has been no breach of the regulations. But we would say that, if the store did allow the person in, we wouldn't charge either party because of the exemption allowance in the bylaw, and the Ontario regulation allows for that to occur. And so we can delineate what the issues are and maybe where they need to go. But as far as what a business can legally do with a customer, what constitutes an assault then becomes the purview of the police to decide, and who is going to be charged, whether it be the employee or the patron or both. Because when you start mixing it up like that, that opens those doors, and then the safety of the entire situation is thrown into question, because you'll have something occurring. And that's why the de-escalation and such is so important, and to recognize that point where you need police assistance to maintain the public safety. And so that's kind of something that you'll have to reason with a lawyer as to what you can do and how far you can push it. But I think when you have all these other things in place, you stop short of raising all those questions by engaging the police at the appropriate time. And you've done that through your policies and procedures and by looking at the situations. Better to call them in too early than too late, and making sure that your employees are very much aware of this. And I can't emphasize that enough. Preparation is key to all of it. And if you're not prepared, then you will get, the result you get in the end will vary. And if you're lucky, it'll go right, but due to lack of preparation, it'll probably go wrong. So I think that would go a long way. The COVID regulations themselves do not have business support built into them. The obligation and responsibility is passed down to the service provider to ensure that these things are happening. It's a broader question, I think, for the government themselves as to what sort of assistance they're willing to provide in your having to do these extra pieces. The precedent is there. There's special things that you have to do for alcohol service and to satisfy the terms allowed by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. And so this is just another piece like that a business now has to do. But whether due to the temporariness of it or the sudden implementation of it, that there's government assistance available, is another question. But the regulations themselves merely impose the responsibility. And so they really don't contain any kind of relief of these types of situations or from preventing them from starting in the first place.
Tom, I think the first audience question might be something you can handle, and it's from Scott Wagler. Thank you. It says, how do you know a false vaccination certificate, and what do you do if you suspect one?
Yeah, so, it would be an offense under the regulations because it does say that someone has to show it, and failure to show it or an improper one would be an offense under this. Now, all certificates should have the QR code, and that QR code can be scanned, and it would provide, the green check mark if it was valid or not. So, you've got that process in place. If you suspect one is fraudulent, then it would become an investigation that would have to be started. We haven't had to do one of those yet, so yeah, and mostly because anyone who tried to use it has left, or we don't know who it is.
Right.
And then, we would have to look at, charging authority, whether it's under the HPPA for, an improper document from the Ministry of Health. So that would be something that we would have to carry forward. But on the ground, you would be looking at that QR code and that the certificate had that code on it, that it is the most recent one that was put out back in October. And it would contain the information of both vaccinations, when you got them, what kind it was. It would have the QR code on it, and your policies should address that as well. And that's another discussion with legal counsel as to what responsibilities you would have if you suspect that this is a fraudulent document, much like you would do with someone who's got a false ID for alcohol service.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question from the audience? Feel free to open up your mic if you do. Might be some slow typers here. While we're waiting for another question from the audience, I'll go back to the panelists here, and I'd like to ask you to give some general advice for business owners, and maybe it's just, and I think I'll start with Betty, and then I'll go to Shelley and Tracy and Tom. And if I see some other questions come up, I'll stop us in the middle and we can get to that one right away. So please feel free to ask your questions. But Betty, some general advice for our business owners and employees here today.
Sure, a couple of things that I would say in response to sort of being in that stance of not taking things personally, or being in that stance of not contributing to escalation. There's a metaphor that I've used in lots of my workshops. And so if you've been in them, you've probably seen this metaphor before or heard it. But it's a metaphor that involves the use of a mug. And this metaphor, I was working once coaching a manager who was stuck because he was taking things personally, and it was limiting his ability to be an effective manager. There was a mug on the table between us, and I said, let's pretend that the mug is your thoughts, about this, whatever it is, your directives that you give. When you make a directive, do you hold it really close as though it represents your personhood, or do you hold it at arm's length? He said, oh, I hold it close. I've thought about it. I've developed it. And I said, so when people disagree with you, does it feel like they're disagreeing with your personhood? He said, absolutely. And I said, this is where you're getting stuck. See, it's very, if the mug is just something that's neutral and out there, you're just disagreeing with the mug and you're not disagreeing with each other's personhoods. And in this escalation, part of what really causes escalation is that people feel like their personhood is at risk. Both the person coming into your establishment and the person on the receiving end, when they get this, can feel like their personhood is at risk. And so my advice to this middle manager was, when you have an idea, put it in the mug. And when the person disagrees with you, put their disagreement in the mug. And whatever you do, hold the mug at arm's length. And whatever you do, don't shove the mug into their chest, because they are not their thoughts and feelings. You are not your thoughts and feelings. We have thoughts, we have feelings. We are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. That includes the person who's really escalated, walking into our establishment, really angry for one reason or another. So how do we think, okay, they're really angry. I'm going to stick that in the mug and we're just going to talk about the mug with each other. I'm not going to take it personally, because when I take it personally, I have to defend myself in order to stay alive. But if I can keep it at arm's length, I can have a conversation with that person. We're just talking about the mug. I don't need to defend myself to stay alive because I already am alive. Right? There's something about sort of depersonalizing it that allows us, I think, to be more gracious. And when we're more gracious, we can do this more effectively.
I'm going to remember this. It's great for, not only de-escalation, but almost everything in life. Teenagers, I'll tell you, I have two. Okay, and Shelley, how about yourself? Some advice?
Yeah, I love Betty's metaphors. Aren't they great? You never forget them. I remember them all the time. I would say two things. One would be, when you're listening to what somebody is saying to you, it's not necessary. So when we generally listen to people, we're listening to debate. Really, it's built into us to kind of debate what they're saying and kind of offer our own perspective. In these situations, you're listening for understanding. So your ability then to acknowledge where they're at doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means I can acknowledge and I can hear you. And I think sometimes what happens is people think when I acknowledge, that means that you think then I agree with you. And it's not the same thing. And the other thing I would say is, training to learn how to do this is great. Please add practice time into it and debriefing time, because training will only do so much. I think you need to practice it and you need to learn what's working and what's not working. And so those debrief conversations after something occurs is really critical to you building your skill set and your ability to be empowered and stepping into those situations.
We have 5 minutes left. And so Tracy, I'll go to you, some general advice, and then Tom, back to you, and we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add than what the experts have already shared about planning and training and listening, body language, verbal cues, all of those things. I just wanted to share a couple comments that were made to me by business owners. One is around being proactive around your responsible house service policies. So, not allowing people to come in if they look like they might be intoxicated and don't overserve, because we know that those tend to maybe escalate situations. Another thing that we haven't talked about is there would be a social media component to this as well. And so business owners being proactive and transparent about online feedback. And I know one specific business owner said that they are regularly every day going on and reviewing what people are sharing content daily on their social media so that they can try to stem the tide or whatever else if they need to. So just a couple other things that I was thinking about.
Yeah, great. And you're right, we haven't talked about social, and that's such a busy place. Betty and Shelley, I'd love to hear more about that, but we're running out of time. So that's another webinar. Maybe Helen, we can set that one up. Rachel, Tom, last words here, general advice.
Yeah, be prepared. Know what you're doing, understand why it is you're doing what you're doing, and make sure your staff are aware of all of this and that supports are in place for them. I think that's key. People on the front lines need to know that there is another layer that they can fall back on, and that, you know, everyone understands what's supposed to happen.
Great. Well, thank you so much to each of our panelists, Betty Priest, Tom, Shelley, and Tracy. I'm making eye contact with each of you. You don't know it, but I am. Thank you so much for coming. And actually, I think it's really important. And I did see this question that came in the chat, and someone is asking, how do we watch this webinar? So it seems to be some of the attendees haven't seen it yet. And I'm just wondering if I can hear from someone from the region to let them know how they can to view that webinar at another point. Laura, there she is.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining today. We will be posting this up on the region's YouTube channel, and we'll post it up onto the region's website as well, with the link to the webinar as well as the link to the event today, so that you will have access to both, and we'll share it out on social as well.
Excellent. So that free de-escalation webinar will be available. And then the team at the region also wanted me to mention as well that there is mental health support available. And I think that that's really important. It's, you know, for a lot of us business owners, that's the one thing we just keep pushing under the rug because we're so busy. So I think it's incredible that the region's done this. They've developed a dedicated mental health and well-being pilot program for the tourism and hospitality workforces. So how do you get access to it? It's being managed by the Horizon Family and Community Services. And so I think you can get some quick, they're going to talk to provide your workers from the industry with quick access to mental health support. So you can actually go to it's a Facebook page. And actually, do you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the link right into our chat box, because I just think it's so great to have that. I hope that worked to everyone. I think I can send it out to everyone here. So please share this with your incredible employees who are you know, showing up for work and doing the best they can. Hopefully some of these resources will help them. And also I just want to point out, all of you are amazing. Like, you know, we're so busy taking, you know, working so hard and all these kinds of things. And we don't take enough time for a little bit of self-care. So, hey, I'm going to put on my self-care hat for all of you today and just say, thanks for everything that you're doing in this community. You know, I love eating in restaurants. I'm a bit of a foodie. I appreciate what you're doing. I love staying in hotels. There's no kids and there's the big, beautiful bed. So everything that all of you do is so important to this community. I know it hasn't been easy, but know that there are a lot of people out there that really cherish the work that you do and know it's important. So thank you to everybody for coming out today, and hopefully you learned something. I know I learned a ton. I've got Post-it notes all over my desk here, things that I can do. So thanks again to the panelists. You are all awesome. And thanks to the region for organizing this today.